My castaway this week is a chef. Born nearly 30 years ago on a Leeds council estate, his intention on leaving school was to break free and enjoy himself. Certainly not to cook for the enjoyment of others. He took a job as a kitchen hand and slowly an obsession with food developed. Determined to learn the art through experience rather than formal training, he begged a job in a top London restaurant working under Albert Roux. From there he went to Nico and on to Raymond Blanc, absorbing the repertoire of Britain's top chefs. Today he is their rival. He runs his own restaurant in South London, is the youngest chef ever to win 2 Michelin stars, and he holds the other qualification of many a successful restaurateur. He has a reputation for being less than polite to some of his customers. He is Marco Pierre White. Shall we deal with the reputation first, Marco? When are you rude to your customers and why?
I don't believe I'm rude to my customers. I believe my customers are rude to me, and that's why I politely ask them to leave my restaurant. I don't like people who click fingers. I don't like people who mimic my French staff or have laughs at their expense, especially when they're working long days. They should be just left be. And what a lot of people don't realise is enjoyment in a restaurant is a two-way street. They have got to come in to the restaurant and sit down and enjoy themselves, and they've got to give off niceness, and they've got to be polite with my staff and show affection. And if they do that, then they get it back. If they come in and they're rude and abrupt and short, they don't wish to be served by them.
So what do you do? Just march out and say, excuse me, would you leave?
No, not necessarily. No, they've got to be very rude now. Like nowadays, I just bite the leather, and I sort of tell my manager, and we've both grown together because my manager was only 19 when he joined me, and I was 25. We were very young boys, and he could barely speak English, and I could barely cook, and we just did not do a very good job. It was like faulty towers, but...
So this image that you have of being a sort of talented young man who can't be bothered to control his temper because his success has gone to his head...
But people who condemn me as being a talented young man who can't control his temper are people who obviously don't know me. I expect results, and if somebody makes a mistake in my establishment, then I do shout at them. Because at the end of the day, it's my name above the door. And if the customer writes a letter of complaint, then it's to me and not to the young person concerned.
So now you're off to a desert island, courtesy of us. There's no one to shout at. There's nothing there to cook that we know of. What are you going to do?
I think for a while, I think I'd really like it because all my spare time is actually spent in the countryside doing field sports, either shooting or fishing or just walking. And so I think for 3 months or 6 months or 2 months, however long, I think I just have a great time and just sort of hang out on an island and just enjoy myself, sort of bringing those natural instincts out of me.
And what's the first record you'd put on your gramophone?
It's by Steve Harley, Come Up and See Me.
Why do you want that?
It's just one of those great songs. It reminds me of when I was a young boy of 16 when I first left home. It was like the first time in my life I'd ever been given total freedom.
So when did you catch the food bug, Marco? How did it happen?
I remember when I was a young boy, I was in Harrogate, and I was in the Hall Porter's Lodge, and I found this little book, and it was called The Gastronomie Guide. And so I started flicking through it, and I realised that this was a food guide. I didn't know there was such a thing as a food guide. And so I started flicking through, and I remember seeing the box tree, 3 stars, The Gastronomie. I read about it, and I thought, what am I doing here?
This was just down the road, the box tree.
This was a box tree about 50 miles away. And I thought, what am I doing here? If I'm going to spend my days in a kitchen, I might as well work somewhere wonderful. And so I rang them up, and they told me to come down, and I went down. And I remember walking in, and I'd never seen anything like it in my life. It was like walking into an Aladdin's cave. It was just like the most beautiful junk shop you could ever imagine, with wonderful works of art. And there's these 2 guys who were totally eccentric. They had a great charm. They had something... even the way Mr. Reed spoke to me, there was depth within his words. And he was an incredible man. Great motivator, great inspirer. And he started talking to me and this and that. And I'd never seen a French cook before, or a French chef or anything. And he said to one of the waiters, he said, go tell Michel to bring some terrines through. So Michel, this French cook, appeared, white clogs, immaculately dressed, with these terrines on these silver salvers. And I just could not believe what I was seeing. I'd never seen food look so beautiful. And so I took the job, and that's where it all started. Remember, sort of everything was served in silver dishes and on. It was just quite magical, the whole thing.
And so from then on, I mean, did you dream about food?
Some nights I wouldn't sleep. I'd be thinking all night of what to do, and I mean, my ideas were mostly totally useless, and my concepts were mostly incredibly weird. But
you were creating dishes in your head.
But I was creating and thinking in my head, and that's where my mind started to work.
You've said that there's only one dish, so far anyway, that you've created that is perfect, and that's your tagliatelle of oysters with caviar. Now, why is that perfect?
It's just a wonderful concept. Even from it arriving, I mean, the way I eat it is, and most people use a knife and a fork, but I don't. I mean, you just pick it up with your hands. It's incredibly sensuous. And then when you try to get your mouth around the shell, and you get all these textures and flavours in your mouth. It's just wonderful. It just sort of sends you to ecstasy. It's great.
You have quite a reputation for sticking your fingers in food. You did a programme on the television where viewers got quite upset because you kept tasting things and sticking your fingers in.
That only shows off how narrow-minded they are. It only shows off what they're brought up on. Looks at it like this. We all fillet fish with our fingers. We all prepare vegetables with our fingers. We all arrange things on plates with fingers. What is the crime?
Record number 2. What's that?
She's So Modern by the Boomtown Rats. I think back to those days when I left school. And I remember saving up my money, my £15 a week or £20 a week or sometimes £40 a week, depending on how much overtime I did. I used to run off and buy all these outrageous clothes, or what I thought were outrageous, and it was just rather nice sort of being able to express myself for the first time with clothes.
And this is a memory of the days when you began to do that.
When I thought I was trendy.
So, Marco, your mother was Italian and your dad was a Yorkshireman, and your 2 older brothers were called Clive and Graham. Why were you Marco?
I really don't know. I think I was my mother's child, because my father was a very strong man, very sort of Victorian ways, and he did really rule the roost. And I think when I came along, I think my mother, I don't know, wanted to put her personality into one person.
And did Italy itself and its food play much of a part in your early life?
I used to go with my mother for 3 months, 6 months. The majority of my first 6 years was spent there.
And then when you were 6, she died?
When I was 6, she died. My younger brother stayed in Italy. Me and my 2 older brothers came to England.
What happened? Why did she die?
She just had my younger brother. My brother was 13 days when she died. She died of a brain hemorrhage.
So your childhood then suddenly changed dramatically, presumably?
It changed. It was just incredible. I remember once, after my mother's death, I remember one of the teachers asked me a question, and I answered them in Italian. And, I didn't realise at the time, everyone started laughing. And I remember saying to myself when I was a young boy sitting there, did I answer in Italian or English? I didn't even know the answer. And that's when I used to have special English lessons. And I think I actually, I know now for a fact, I didn't know as a child, but I'm rather dyslexic. And, even that, I used to get taunted for that as a boy at school. And
but you don't have an accent now. Where's the Yorkshire gone?
I don't really know. I mean, I came to London when I was 19, and I think I must have absorbed it from the people I associate myself with.
And you don't go back to Yorkshire, do you?
I go back now and then. I was fishing in Yorkshire a month ago, where I was when I was a boy.
But you don't go back to Yorkshire now to visit your relatives?
Oh, no. I've left it behind because I've got business in London. But it doesn't mean I don't think about my life in Yorkshire. It doesn't mean I don't think about my brothers or my father.
When did you last see your father?
When I was 16, so I suppose that's 14 years ago. 13 years ago.
Why so long?
My father remarried. I didn't approve.
You have no desire to see your father again?
None whatsoever.
You're also teetotal. Is that something that's in the family?
No. I mean, my father and my brothers indulge heavily in alcohol. I've just never drunk.
What about school back in Yorkshire? What did your teachers think that life had in store for you?
They made comments, like I remember my headmaster on my last day at school said, "White, you'll be nothing in life." He's absolutely right. Just because I've achieved 2 Michelin stars, just because I've achieved and I've made money and I've got my business and I earn mostly 15 times the amount he'll earn in a year, that doesn't mean I'm something special. If I think back now, the problem with my schooling was that they didn't know how to inspire. And that is the problem. It's like a lot of people within my profession. I can take a boy from a council house and I love it. And they've got no nothing. or they don't think they've got anything. And 6 months later, you see this boy, you see how his hands are disciplined, you see how his mind's working, you see how he cares, you see how he tastes things, you see how he's conscientious about a thumbprint on a plate. That's, when you can bring that out of a person who's been suppressed all his life, that's called achievement.
Record number 3.
It's by Gene Pitney, Something's Gotten Hold of My Heart, and the reason why I've chosen this song is there's a side of me which is just incredibly romantic, and, you know, I don't really like to portray this image. I don't like to show this part of myself off. I don't know why. It's just, you know, it's very hard expressing emotions sometimes. It's very hard to show what you feel about people or what you feel about the people you love, and I don't know, I'd much prefer just to put this song on while I was pouring them a glass of wine or making them a cup of coffee or something. Let him do the talking for me.
That first job you had at the St George's Hotel in Harrogate, what was the first thing they gave you to do? Do you remember?
I remember I walked into the kitchen, and the first job they gave me, I had to pass some veal stock. And it was so glutinous and jellified, I had to pass it through a very fine sieve, and it took me about 3 hours. And then I didn't even succeed, they just took it off me. And now I think back, they were just being incredibly cruel, because what they should have done is, like, you just don't do that. You pass a warm stock through a chinois so it runs through because it's liquid. But they made me pass it jelly.
So you were pressing the jelly through the sieve?
I was trying to pass the jelly through a very fine sieve. And they were just very cruel.
But undoubtedly your first lesson was that actually working in a kitchen is extremely hard work.
It really does destroy you. It does destroy you. And, like, I'm 29 now, and I did 6 days a week, 100 hours a week for sort of 3.5 years. And I never thought I would say that it got the better of me, but I've got to be humble, and I've got to say it did beat me.
So just to give me an idea of this enormous stress that you describe, I mean, tell me about a typical Saturday night in your kitchen. Why is it so sweaty and so stressful?
A Saturday night in Harvey's, you know, in the middle of the night, 9 o'clock comes, and you're wading, you've got tickets around you, you've got food around you, you've got waiters walking around you, you've got boys bumping into you, burning your wrist, like they did the other week. One of the boys took a pan to my wrist. You've got the manager wanting something else, you've got a customer wanting this, you've got this and that. I mean, your back is just drenched with sweat. I mean, you know, you just don't know what is happening. You just are oblivious to the world outside.
How many of you are there in this
There's
kitchen?
myself and 4 in the main kitchen and 2 in pastry. I mean, it's just a nightmare. If a souffle's not risen enough, then it goes back. So, because I see everything.
You're quality control as well as cooking.
Every night I have to cook. And when you come to Harvey's and you're paying the prices Harvey's is charging, then you want me to cook. You can go to a lot of the big houses in Britain and pay big money, and the person whose name's above the door is not in the kitchen. And that's when it's robbery.
What do they normally do? Do they normally stand in what they call the pass, where the food goes out and just checks
a lot of chefs stand on the pass, and they just look at the food. But they're not tasting it, they're not feeling it, they're not cooking it.
So there's a lot of pressure, as you say. Is there a lot of noise in this kitchen on a Saturday night?
Not from speech.
Just the clatter?
The only person who speaks is myself. No one else is allowed to speak. They just do their job.
What are you saying?
I might say to a boy, how long for table 5? 2 minutes. That's it.
So it's all geared to getting all the dishes for table 5, as it were, ready at the same time?
Everything's up to ready at the same time. People don't understand 15 seconds is a lifetime in cooking. If you're cooking a very thin piece of salmon in a pan and you're cooking it pink, if you leave it in there 15 seconds too long, then it's overdone.
Is there panic, then?
No, I don't allow them to panic. If you panic, you've lost it.
But do you panic?
Never. I can't afford to.
But you're absorbing the stress?
I absorb the pressure.
Let's have your next piece of music. What is it?
It's the Rolling Stones and the Continental Drift. I suppose my real hero, if I've ever got one in life, is Keith Richards. He's just a man who just lives life to the full, and I envy that.
It was 10 years ago, Marco, that you arrived in London with £7 in your pocket and knocked on the door of one of the best restaurants in town and ended up working for Albert Roux. It's almost too good to be true as a story that this top chef took you on. How did you persuade him? What did he see in you?
I didn't persuade him. I mean, I'd went to the Chewton Glen for an interview the day before, and when I came back to London, I'd missed my train back to Yorkshire, so I had to walk the streets of London. And while I was walking the streets of London waiting to get my train back, you know, because I couldn't get into a bed and breakfast, I had no dosh on my skin, and I came across the Gavroche. And I thought, well, since I'm in London, maybe in the morning, I'll just go and knock on their door. And so I knocked on the door at 9 o'clock in the morning, and this young man told me to go to Wandsworth Road to Rue head office, and he told me how to get there. I didn't have the money for a bus, so I had to walk, so I was really wrecked. So I walked there, and I walked into the office. There was Albert sitting there. I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought it was like a mirage. And he said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Well, I've come for a job." And I didn't sit down or anything, and it was all very brief. It must have lasted 2 minutes, but it seemed like a lifetime. And he read my reference, and he said, "You worked at the box tree?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "How long were you there?" And I said, "A year." He said, have you got digs in London?" I said, "No." I said, "I'm only down for today." And he turned around and said, "Right, come down on Monday, we'll find your digs and you start work on Tuesday." You know, ever since then, I mean, Albert stood by me for 10 years. I mean, he's been like a father to me, and it is really like a fairy tale.
But can you sum up, in a couple of sentences, difficult this, what you learned from Albert Roux?
Extravagance. The way they used truffles in the Gavroche in the early 80s, the way they used wild mushrooms, the way they presented their food, the way everything was done. It was so extravagantly done.
But he wasn't enough for you, was he? Because you went on then to work at the same time, I think, for Nico Ladini. What did you learn from him that you hadn't learned from Albert?
Consistency. I learned consistency from this man. And that's what Nico is. He's an incredibly consistent man.
Record number 5.
The Stranglers and Golden Brown.
Why?
I sort of took time out from cooking in sort of 83, I think it was. It reminds me of that year I took out and didn't really care about my career. I threw it in the gutter for a while and just enjoyed myself. It was fun.
So tell me about opening your own restaurant. It was 1987. You talk about it sometimes if it was years ago, but I mean it was four short years ago.
It feels like years ago.
You bought this rundown wine bar in Wandsworth and you went flat out to make a name for yourself. But 6 months later, you'd lost 2 stones in weight and £50,000, and yet the restaurant had been full to bursting. Now, what went wrong?
I gave too much away. I never, even to this day, I've never costed a dish. I've never priced a dish. I've never looked at the price of anything. The only difference is in those days, I had to cut into the market, so I cut into the market with incredibly cheap prices. And for whatever reasons, I got a mountain of publicity. The majority of publicity didn't come about my food. It came about me as a person, and my long hair and my sort of nightly habits and things like this. I mean, whatever, it doesn't really matter. And then I got my Michelin star, so therefore Michelin stars justify prices. Mm. And that's what's happened.
And you're into profit now?
I'm into profit. I make a living.
But it hasn't been very good for your health, has it? I mean, there were stories that last year your blood pressure was so high you were close to having a heart attack.
You know, health doesn't stay with you for long, and if you carry on punishing yourself and you carry on sort of pushing yourself, then, of course, something's got to give. And it just came to a head last summer. And
that's the only way you can do it, is it? I mean, there's no way that you can pull back, cut down, give 3/4 instead of 110%.
You know, I suppose, if I've got to be honest with myself, I do love my restaurant. I do love it. And I would never sell it, ever.
Next piece of music, what's that?
A Good Year for the Roses by Elvis Costello. I remember when I was a boy in Oxford, I didn't have many friends and I worked very hard, and a lot of the time was spent by the river or just sort of reading or listening to music, and I was getting over my first love, I suppose. And I kind of liked the song, A Good Year for the Roses, and I thought it summed up life and it helped me get through that sort of sad patch of my life.
You remember the day you got the news that you'd won the 2 Michelin stars?
I remember it well. We had a private party booked at Harvey's for 12 people. And we didn't know who it was. And then my manager came through and said, "Marco, Derek Brown, the head inspector of Michelin, has just walked in the restaurant. And he's asked to see you." So I walked out to see him. And he gave me a guide and he said, "Congratulations, you've won your 2 stars." And he opened up the page and showed it to me, and I just sort of couldn't believe it. It was like everything I've ever worked for in my life. I've always wanted 2. Never 3, never 1, just 2. And I just couldn't believe it. And so then I spoke to Albert Roux, and he arranged a special dinner for us, for me and my boys. And I remember watching them all sitting down, enjoying themselves, all incredibly happy. And it was like if a shadow came over me. all I wanted then was my mother to be with me, but she couldn't. And so it goes to prove in life we can have a lot in life, and we can get a lot of things in life, but sometimes we can't have everything we want. And so, therefore, Harvey's became the monument for my mother.
We've talked, in talking about food, I mean, we've used all these words, extravagance and passion and commitment and love and all these things.
Dirt and sweat.
But what do you say to those people who find that kind of talk an affectation, actually, who say in the end, food is just food and all this fancy talk is really the stuff of Sude's corner?
You must respect them. Not everybody in life has been given the opportunity I've been given. I remember one day 2 kids walked into my restaurant about 18 years old, and they said, we'd like to have a party here. They had ripped jeans on and this and that. And they said they'd like to have a party here. And I said, why do you want a party? I was most curious. And they said, we're getting married. And we've been to the 2 restaurants up the street. One's a wine bar and one's a sort of brasserie. And they've refused us. And I said, you're getting married? Oh, so I thought, I said, how much are you wanting to spend? They said, £15 a head. And I said, what do you want? They said, we want patty, chicken Kiev, and a chocolate cake. And so I said, fine, we'll do it. My manager was dying. And I walked into the kitchen and said, next Wednesday, we're doing a wedding party for 2 kiddies. And they're having this. I said, Marc, how can you cook this food? And what they all forgot, like a lot of people forget in life, is we once loved patty. We once loved chicken Kiev. And we once loved chocolate cake. And just because we've seen another side of life, does it mean we must forget where we came from? Does it mean we must forget the things which our parents gave us and we thought were the world? And so they had their chicken Kiev.
They had it, did they?
They did. They loved it.
And how much did you charge them?
£15 a head. I lost money, but that's not the point. I gave them a memory.
But in the main, you charge something like, what, for 2 people?
The average price is about 150 for 2.
150 for 2. Tell me honestly, do you think it's good value for money to have dinner for 2 with wine and all the trimmings, as they say?
I think it's very good value.
£150?
I think it's very good value. But that is my opinion. At the end of the day, a man who goes down to the local pub and spends £15 a night on beer, I call that expensive. He calls it good value.
Record number 7.
It's Wuthering Heights by Kate Bush, which sort of was number 1 the first I ever started working. All I ever heard was this one song. And it must have been played 15 times. They flogged the song to death. They must have been on a percentage or something. They're wild.
Where are we going next in food, Marco? We've had cuisine masseur and naturelle and nouvelle. What happens next? Simplicity
is where it's going. Honesty. And bringing back some of those wonderful old recipes which died a long time ago.
Like what?
Well, coq au vin was one of those great dishes which was prostituted to death. It was like pig's head. I mean, it's wonderful as pig's head. I mean, it's on the menu at Harvey's now at the moment. It's wonderful with spices. And they were all pushed out of the door. It's like there's a 3-star in France which has got chicken Kiev on its menu, garnished with little mousseron. And it's bringing these dishes back, which were great dishes. Like I was at Albert's not so long ago, and Albert cooked the most wonderful coq au vin in the world. And it was garnished with the little girole, which is a wild Michelin, the little lardons, the petits oignons, and the little crête de coq, which is the combs, the coq combs. Wonderful it was.
The very strange thing is, I mean, all these French names trip off your tongue. You've never been to France, have you?
No, never been to France, never had the time.
Can you speak conversational French?
No, wouldn't try to.
So this is kitchen French, is it?
This is kitchen French. I've got a lot of French staff, and I can demand orders to my French waiters. I mean, or if I've got French cooks, and I talk to them in French and tell them what I want.
But buying a ticket at the railway station would be quite big.
Well, I think years ago, I mean, I wouldn't be able to buy a ticket now. Knowing me, I would get someone else to do it for me, do you know what I mean? I'd pay them to do it. But, if I go back years ago, I'd love to have gone to France, but I never had the money or the confidence.
So how important is that 3rd Michelin star to you, Marco?
I was talking to Albert about it the other day, and Albert says, Marco, you'll be the next 3-star in Britain. And, I listen to him and I respect what he has to say, but, I don't know whether I want the aggravation. I don't know whether I want the pressure.
As you say, Albert obviously thinks you're capable of it. What he said of you is, and I quote, if he doesn't burn himself out, he'll go right to the top. Which do you think is more likely?
I think the decision of that question, if you want me to be frank with myself, is my decision. and it depends what I want. If I want my 3-star, then I might burn myself out. Who knows?
Shall we have your last record?
Sure, it's Louis Armstrong, and What a Wonderful World. It's one of those songs I remember being a little boy. My father used to play on a Sunday, or that sort of music. And on a Sunday now, if I'm going off fishing, I'll put What a Wonderful World on by Louis Armstrong. It's just one of those songs which is nice to wake up to.
Now, what you have to do is choose one of those records that you would like to have with you more than any of the others.
I think it would have to be A Good Year for the Roses.
That's the sad one, isn't it?
That's right. But I wouldn't be with my daughter. I wouldn't be with my friends. I wouldn't be with the Harveys. So there'd have to be something in my life to keep my feet on the ground.
What about a book?
The book I chose, that was a very hard question to ask myself. And, I wanted to choose Pierre Kaufman's Memories of Gastronomie. I wanted to choose Albert's book. But I didn't choose any of those. I chose a book by a man called Fernand, which is called La Gastronomie. It's not really a recipe book. It's got recipes in it, but it doesn't say... The recipes aren't in ounces. It sort of says, take one chicken and roast it and add some vinegar and add some of this. And it's just very simple. It's like a miniature history book of this man's life, and the philosophies are quite incredible. They really are incredible.
And what about your luxury on the island?
Well, since you deprived me of my fishing rod, I had to choose a picture of my daughter. That's all.
Marc Pierre White, thank you very much indeed for letting us hear your Desert Island Discs.
Thank you.